Industry veteran BrianFerguson was born in Venezuela, not your ordinary incubator for a Disney animator, but then Brian was not an ordinary Venezuelan. His parents were Canadian, and when they returned to the home country, Brian attended high school and then university, where he earned a zoology degree. But drawing and animating had always been passions, and when Mr. Ferguson came to realize that counting ticks off the back of a moose was not the zoology career for which he longed, Brian enrolled at Sheridan College and began animation training in earnest. After Sheridan, there were animation jobs in Toronto and New York, but Brian knew his opportunities on the East Coast were limited, so he applied for work and was accepted at Disney Feature Animation in California. The company had just released the groundbreaking feature Little Mermaid, and Brian found himself surrounded by artists enthusiastic about taking the art form to new heights. Beginning his Disney career as a rough in-betweener on The Prince and the Pauper, Brian has since worked as both a journey and supervising animator on most of the animated features that have followed. Brian's most recent work was on the short Paperman. We spoke in the conference room of the Animation Guild on August 6th, 2012.
Yeah, but it's usually a piece that stuck out for me for many years. But, you know, over time my taste has evolved a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, the stuff that you loved back in 1973 isn't the stuff that you necessarily love to the same degree today?
It's something like that, though I would say that I actually still love that stuff to the same degree, but I'd say what's changed is I have a better appreciation for stuff that I didn't so much that long ago. Yeah.
We'll get into what that is. Okay. We are speaking today to BrianFerguson, ace Disney animator, and don't laugh.
Sorry.
And we're talking on August 6th, 2012 in the Disney conference room. So let us begin. You told me you were born in Venezuela.
That's
of all
right.
Places of Canadian parentage.
That's right. Yeah, my father was an electrical engineer, and he thought on a lark it'd be kind of fun to help set up the power companies in Venezuela. So as part of a program, an international program with Canadian International Power, he and my mom went down to Venezuela for what was going to be about 2 years to help set up the electric company down there.
It lasted a bit longer than that?
Yeah, about a dozen years for them.
And you were there until you were 10 or 11 then, right?
Yes. And at that time the company decided that it would be good to have my dad have a bigger piece of paper behind his name. So they offered him what they called a Sloan Fellow. It was a master's program at MIT.
So
sciences.
That was nice.
Yeah, he couldn't turn that down. He had been planning to go back to Canada at that time, but couldn't turn down that free education.
So at the age of 10 or 11, you moved to Boston.
Yes, yeah, the Boston area.
Did you grow up in Caracas?
It was Maracaibo.
How far out of Caracas was that? Or
I would estimate it must be several hundred miles.
Oh, so it's not that close.
No,
it's not like it's a bedroom community.
No. Maracaibo is the capital of its own particular state, and it's at the it's toward the very west end of the country. It's a very northern tip. There's a big lake that comes in off of the ocean that you can see called Lago de Maracaibo, and Maracaibo is right at the point where it pinches up against the ocean.
So it's between a big lake and the ocean, Maracaibo?
Yes, it is.
Must have been pretty.
Yes, beautiful. Yeah, it's a really lush, beautiful place.
And hot and humid. Probably.
Hot and humid, though I didn't realize it because I was growing up there, born and growing up there.
And you thought that was just the way it always was?
Yep, it was home.
Did you ever have any change of seasons, or was it pretty much the same year round?
Well, actually, I think there was one time we had unseasonably cold weather when it went down to something like 65 degrees. Or
My
like
God, 65. How hot? Now, how hot would it get?
I don't remember it ever going into the hundreds, but it probably did at some point.
The 80s and 90s were more.
Yeah, 80s and 90s, and it again it was right against the ocean, so it was fairly consistent, I think, fairly regulated.
Yeah, yeah. You got some sea breezes from time to
Yeah.
time. Okay, so how do you get, you were telling me over lunch that you got kind of interested in animation as a hobby as a little kid. You were doing flip books,
Yeah.
and your mother was helping you.
Yeah, my mom was an artist. She, not professionally, but she went through arts in university, fine arts, and she taught me to do, the flip books where you would draw on every page in the margins of a book, and then you flip it and you have animation. And that was third grade, and from that point on, I filled the margins of all my scribblers, both sides, with animation.
What kind of animation?
A lot of stick figures. And
So she wasn't teaching you squash, stretch, reaction?
no, that was something that wasn't even a concept to me until that book that Frank and Ollie came out with.
The Art of Animation.
The Art of Animation. It was The Illusion of Life.
Oh, The Illusion of Life.
The Illusion of Life, and that was like a Bible for animation.
Amazing. Well, okay, so you're down in Venezuela, and you at the age of 11, you switch to Boston, and you're there for a year and a half. Did you continue being interested in animation at that time, or?
As much as always, it wasn't so much focused on animation, I guess. It was a big part of what I loved doing, but it was mostly drawing, and I was always into the sciences. I was thinking I was going to be a pilot, or I was going to be a veterinarian, or I was going to be some sort of scientist.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you come from your parents have a science background, your dad certainly does.
Yeah.
So then you moved back to St. Albert in Canada, right?
Yeah, that's
and
right.
Your dad takes up a job. What was he doing there? Was he back still in the physics, electrical, and?
He was at this point he was hired to be a consulting engineer, and it ended up that his work was largely, I guess, hiring other engineers. So he was at that for a bunch of years until there was a point around the 80s that the market went bad for engineering, and so his job became pretty redundant, I guess. And at that point he started studying very heavily in securities. So he made this really big switch.
He went into financials?
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's a jump.
That's a major jump. Yeah, but he's I could make a whole big story just on him. He's a very interesting.
Well, we're not doing the
character.
life and times of your father.
No, I'd love to.
Let's concentrate on you.
All right, but really, my dad's an interesting one. So.
Well, but I don't know, on an animation blog, how much people want to know about finances.
Really.
Okay, so now you're in high school, and you're moving towards going to college.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, the high school was it was called an academic high school, so it was really geared for preparing people for university, and I was really set up. I was, in my head, I was going into the sciences, and animation was going to be a big hobby.
Yeah.
Because I was spending time that I should have been studying probably doing animation.
Really?
Yeah.
Had you graduated? Were you still doing the flip books, or had you graduated to the 8mm, one frame at a time?
I was drooling over cameras. I was looking for any way that I could work out some sort of technology that would take it a big leap beyond flip books. But at that point, as a matter of at that point, it was looking at stuff like, Bolio movie cameras or Bolex, if whatever was
You were
available
looking at
at that time.
16. You weren't looking at the Super 8.
No, I wanted some quality stuff. But Super 8, it was already at that time the technology was beginning to shift enough that Super 8, 8mm, all that stuff it was going through all these different changes where I'd think, I don't know if years from now I would be able to play this stuff back.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And
transfer it to tape, and then transfer it to a DVD, and then transfer it to the cloud. I think that's the progression.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there was a point where I was thinking, okay, CDs are where it's going to end as far as music goes, because that's where the saving space is going to be permanent, and it won't be like you get scratches like you do for records, and it won't
You were
deteriorate.
half right, but it's all gone onto a thumb drive and onto Amazon storage lockers.
Yeah, and even with that, you kind of go, okay, how long is that technology going to last?
I don't know. I shudder to think.
Yeah.
But anyway, so you were telling me you went to college, and you went to the University of Alberta. Was that
Yes,
it?
that's right.
And majored in zoology and minored in physics.
That's right. Yeah.
And when you came towards the end of your academic career, you got a little taste of being out in the field and thought, and you
Yeah.
started rethinking.
That's right. Yeah. As a matter of fact, one of the biggest deciding factors was this one field trip that one of my zoology classes made to a laboratory that was doing some work. I can't even remember the details of what they were doing. I think it had to do with agriculture, because prairie provinces, that was the big thing. And we went to this town that was a fair bit north of Edmonton, and they had this lab, and I spoke to one of the technicians just as we were passing through, asking how it was they got into what they were doing.
Right.
And I was thinking, how does somebody choose to do this kind of research, which they had been doing for a number of years now, and it just didn't seem interesting to me.
Yeah.
And they said, well, I was studying, and this summer job came up that related to my work or to my studies. I thought I'd go into that, and it seems to have steered my course from that point on. And
What was that summer job?
for that person, it was effectively what they were doing at that point, which was oh man, they were looking at slides, I think, and counting something.
Counting ticks off of
Well, actually, that was a story that was more mine, where I immediately related it to this job that a professor had said. It was looking like it would become available for me. Where I loved this professor, and he the courses he taught, but the summer work was counting ticks on artificially infested moose, which. Parasitology, I have little interest in that, and I wanted to do more like animal behavior. It's the stuff that I was interested in related a lot more to what.
But they were pushing you in another direction.
Well, you just kind of go with what's available, and at that point I was picturing going and counting ticks on artificially infested moose or meese or whatever the plural would be, and thinking this is my life, this is my career for the rest of my life, and
Counting
and
ticks.
Yeah, and I was
No,
thinking,
I don't think so.
Yeah, and who
Something
knows?
else, maybe.
Yeah, and who knows? It could have ended up being really useful. And it could have ended up somehow being really interesting, but I just wasn't convinced at that point. And so, as it turns out, the stuff that held my interest is stuff that I spent more time just thinking about or reading about or studying while I was in school. And then when I ended up going into animation, it became more of the stuff that relates to animation.
So what was the stuff you were still interested in animation, but still as a hobby at this point?
Absolutely, yeah. I was thinking it was going to be an expensive hobby, looking at the cost of cameras and that kind of thing. Oh man, had we had that technology that we've got now, the SLRs can do the camera work for you, and you get the instant feedback and the instant playback. Oh, that would have been so good.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Just behind the curve technologically.
yeah, but then again, that really leveled the playing field as far as whoever could get into because things weren't so readily available. It took a special dedication to you had to really, really want what you were going for, and I was willing to. I was willing to become a starving artist at some point. I'd gone through the sciences and seen that I wasn't going to necessarily be able to choose entirely what my path was going to be, and I was thinking, well, and having had a taste of working at something that I didn't like so much, like construction, which was good money, but oh my goodness, I could not stay in that.
Now, when you graduated, you were saying you went into construction for a summer, right?
Yeah, that's right. And it was actually summer work that I had basically throughout university. I did that for summers, and it was working at a steel yard, steel for fabrication, where we would get in orders of 18-meter bundles of concrete reinforcing rebar, and we would cut them up and send them off to job sites.
Sounds like fun.
Yeah, it was not fun. It was hard work. It was a diversion. The first couple of months of it, coming out of university, I'd be going, "Oh, great! It's a workout. I'm outside part of the time. It's kind of interesting." But by the third month, I'd be desperate to get out of there.
Climbing the walls.
Yeah, and so I knew that was not what I was wanting to stay at.
What decided you to go to? You ended up going to Sheraton, but talk about that, because you went to a meeting hall.
Yeah, there was the Edmonton Film Society. Through that year after I graduated university, I was doing this night course in animation.
Right.
And effectively, the teacher had his heart in it and that sort of thing. But basically, by that time, I had already learned a lot more than he could teach just out of the Illusion of Life book.
Right.
And I had, my drive and a certain amount of ability. For a scientist, I was an amazing artist.
Yeah, and you've been drawing in margins for years.
Yeah, that's right. And so I went to this night. The Edmonton Film Societies would be screening these short animated films, and one of them, it was hosted by Bob Clampett, who had a question and answer period where somebody asked in the audience, "Do you know any good schools for animation in Canada?" And he said, yeah, Sheridan was one that impressed him. And so that put it on the map for me. I hadn't even heard of it up to that point.
Yeah.
And the ones that were available in my province had very little to do, like nobody really thought about animation as a profession. It was just, somebody might do a study as a core or as a class out of a university program that had nothing to do with animation, but they had one class, and other than that, there was the National Film Board of Canada, which would have these little films that people would make that were funded by the National Film Board of Canada. And, that was kind of what I was aiming at by the time I was looking to go into animation.
Yeah.
But once I heard of Sheridan, then I thought, well, I'll apply there. Who knows? I might get in. And they sent back, for my application, they sent back this note that said, thanks for applying, thanks for considering us. We just thought we'd warn you that since you're not part of, you're not from our province, you're not in Ontario, you're in Alberta, we give priority to people in our province, but we'll let you know. And then a month later, I got another thing back from them that was basically a further application where I would do a couple drawings and write a couple essays and that kind of thing. And so after that, I was accepted.
So it took you, about 6 months to get in?
Something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and because I started applying, about 6 months before they started looking to
but you got
start
in.
The next program. Yeah, I got in, and once I was in, like I was thinking, I was all nervous and everything, thinking this is the only place in the entire country that does animation as a program, and it accepts 100 students at a time. At that point, I think it was 105.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, out of the whole country, I'm one of 105, and I was really nervous about what kind of people were going to be in there. And as it turns out, not everybody was really that dedicated to animation. A bunch of them were in there with it as their second or third choice of universities or. But
it was your
schools.
first.
It was my only choice, really. It was what I was going for, and so what I ended up coming out of, coming away from that school with was the idea that you get out of it what you put into it, and they had really great teachers, and the program.
And the classes you thought were worthwhile, and
yep,
you got stuff out of them.
I got stuff out of them. Yeah, there's some classes I chuckled at a little bit, but it's as I look back on it now, they gave me a full rounded education.
So you got everything. You got life drawing.
Yep.
You got animation, Did you get storyboarding? Did they go into storyboarding and all that?
Not as much as I'd have liked. It was, not really. But the thing is, you were supposed to come out of there with a full film project, and so essentially you had everything from the beginning to end covered somewhat. And I did really. I just remember some of the classes that I ended up feeling taught me the most were ones that were a little bit more, I don't know, maybe somebody would call esoteric or something, but they
known to a select few.
Yeah, it's most of the people seem to hate that, like especially this one class, and it was called visual language, and it ended up actually kind of giving me a perspective on art that I think applies in so many areas on so many levels, like from sound to sculpture, three-dimensional appeal and motion and tonal value and color and things like that, direction, and it just put all these things into perspective that I would never have thought of before that class. And
what was it? Well, how would you summarize the philosophy of that class? Was it sum total of an entertainment package, or?
I would say it was. I would say it would be like the sum total of entertainment, though it was calling itself visual language, which I thought was a very apt title.
Yeah.
It worked very well. It's just that the things that I learned specifically as they were taught in that class, I found applied on a much broader plane than it sort of called itself.
Yeah, but you walked away with a well-rounded animation education. And where did you go at that point? Where did you go? Because it's either Southern California and Disney's or one of the other studios, or it's, well, you ended up in New York.
Yeah, at that time Disney was not something you could consider. I think the idea we had was that Disney would not hire Canadians. It just seemed to be kind of closed. And though, I never tried, and I don't know people who applied directly for the time, that I'm not exactly sure how accurate that was.
Yeah.
But a couple of people applied to Don Bluth and got in, and then there was this opportunity that came up with New York Institute of Technology. And that intrigued me because a few years back I had read this article in Forbes magazine or Fortune that was talking about computer graphics and they brought up this little project that was being worked on at the New York Institute of Technology, and it just kept that in my head for quite some time. And I was thinking, if I get through learning animation, I might eventually go into computers and try and work on stuff that looked like that. It was kind of intriguing. Not that I wanted to abandon hand drawn or anything like that, but it was just such an intriguing new thing. As it turned out, this very place was now recruiting for animators to work on this project that they were in the process of trying to develop. Once a bunch of us were hired to go work there, 6 of us, and
so what was the name of the company? You told me over lunch it was in central New York City.
Well, it was directly affiliated with the New York Institute of Technology. There were this one man owned that New York Institute of Technology, but his 2 sons ran 2 different aspects of it. One of it was the CGL, or Computer Graphics Lab Inc., which did the animation, and they were developing hardware and software, I think, and then
that's
the
where
school
Ed Catmull had just left shortly before you got there.
That's right. Ed Catmull's name came up a few times while I was there, and it didn't mean all that much to me. He actually, his name it just came up as somebody that you would really pay attention to, but he's somebody I hadn't heard of up to that point, or
right.
I hadn't paid attention to that much.
Well, he hadn't become the mover and shaker that he became later.
Oh, he was well on his way at that point, though, because there was yet another story that I could take us on a tangent, but a really interesting story about what went on at New York Institute of Technology, where somebody who used to associate with him at the company went to visit him, or he came back to visit, and the boss heard about it and ended up firing him over it.
Really?
Yeah. It was, I mean, I could go into further detail, and it would be, definitely an interesting story, but definitely off the track.
Off the track. So anyway, so you land in New York, and you're getting a degree from New York Institute of Technology while you're working at this company, right?
Right. Yeah. It was kind of our way of justifying having a student visa to work in the country, and as long as we worked on campus, we could animate on this production.
And they weren't paying you anything, so it was a good deal for them.
It was
right?
a good deal for them. Yeah, they paid us. It was, for somebody in my position, it was actually a really good deal too, because I was given a full scholarship for another degree. I guess at this point, another degree wasn't going to necessarily be the big valuable thing, but it was a free education. I had free reign in the bookstore.
Yeah.
I could just go in and say I want this, and they would give it to me, and I had free reign in the cafeteria, and on top of all that, they put us up in this in these dorms.
Yeah.
Nightmare, but it was free, and they. And then on top of all that, they gave us a stipend where we could have a little cash on the side.
So what projects were you working on?
It was called Strawberry Fields. I can't believe I blanked on it. It's called Strawberry Fields. It was being produced by Al Brodax, who came off of Yellow Submarine.
Right.
And
so this is another Beatles project.
Yeah, ish. The Beatles weren't actually directly involved, but they had the rights to the music.
Right.
And except they did not have the right to the original recordings. So we were animating to things like Michael Jackson singing "Come Together," and there were a whole bunch of other slightly more contemporary artists playing Beatles music, and it was a lot of really interesting.
Did this ever get out to the general public?
No,
never did.
It never did.
But you were doing hand-drawn animation, or
Yep.
Okay, you're doing hand-drawn animation.
Hand-drawn.
And your first professional experience doing hand-drawn animation was up in Nelvana before you went down to New York.
Yeah, that's right. So for a couple of months before I was to start in New York, I was going to be sitting around Toronto, and so I thought I'd try and get some work anyway, just to keep my hand in. And Nelvana had some positions available as posers on Care Bears.
And that's on your IMDb to this very day.
That's right. I'm proud of that.
Care Bear, yeah. I thought, wow, you didn't start at Disney's. You started at Nelvana.
Yeah, and the experiences at at Nelvana, especially at the one in New York, gave me this perspective that, really, really awful things had to happen at Disney before I'd think bad things about the company. And
because you always compared, you had that reference to Nelvana, right?
Yes, I was not spoiled enough to suddenly go off in a huff whenever something didn't go my way at the company.
Yeah. Tom Cito has many tales of Nelvana. I don't know if you've ever talked to him about them. But.
Not a lot about Nelvana, no. He's had all kinds of tales about other things too.
Yeah, but okay, so you're New York, and how do you jump from New York to California?
At the point that I had decided that I was really tired of working at that place in New York, Disney happened to be recruiting for
because it was right after Little Mermaid.
Yeah, hot off the success of Little Mermaid, they were doing this big grab for talent, and a bunch of people that I was working with in New York were applying, and they were saying, you should apply, and though I was thinking that I didn't have enough experience, then I started, they were saying, well, so-and-so's applying, and so-and-so's applying, and I was thinking, well,
What do you
heck,
got
if they
to
can do it,
lose?
then yeah. So I applied. A couple of us went in together, and we got hired.
Wow.
Yeah, it was, it wasn't as straightforward as you're in sort of thing, but they kept our portfolios and sent them into California, and then I got a call from Wayne Matthews,
Wayne Metcalf.
Wayne Metcalf, sorry, Bill
Bill Matthews
yeah,
was his boss.
yes, yeah, it was Wayne Metcalf. Sorry, Wayne. And from that point, through the whole thing was just so interesting to me. Like, because actually it was Wayne Metcalf and Leon Jewson who had gone out to New York to look over portfolios.
Oh, okay.
And and they're both really nice guys, and I thought they were both very, very nice guys, and it was interesting in each case. I felt like I had a little in with one or the other. Like Leon was fascinated with the idea that I was from Alberta. Not very many animators were from Alberta.
Yeah, yeah.
And he's from Calgary himself, and I guess he liked this one little scene that I had animated as well. So I was kind of in with him in that little thing. And then with Wayne Metcalf, he saw that I had a couple of degrees, like bachelor's degrees, and he was saying, no animator has bachelor's degrees, and so in that way I was fascinating to him.
Amazing. Yeah. And you got a master's from New York Institute of Technology.
No,
you left before that happened, right?
Yeah, well, I was only going after bachelor's degrees there too, because as far as each time I switched schools, even though I had degrees or diplomas or whatever from whatever previous schools I had, it seems like very few of any of the credits could really be transferred over. Like I took the same English classes over and over and over each school I went to. It's like I didn't know English well enough, and other things like that. And on top of that, so many zoology courses are going to apply at an art school. And so I went through bachelor's programs again and again. They were kind of offering that I could go into a master's program by the end of the time I was at New York Institute of Technology. But by then it would look kind of funny that, with all those degrees that I wouldn't really have, and they were so varied, that I wouldn't really seem
over here, over here, over here.
Yeah, it would seem like I didn't know what I want.
So you get accepted by Disney, and you fly out. Was it your first time in California when you flew out that first time, or you'd been here before?
It was my first time. I flew out. Actually, I made a quick trip to look for a place to stay, and to get a feel for the company, and then I went and drove out. Once I had that kind of worked out, I went and drove out with a
trailer full of stuff. Probably.
Yeah, trailer full of stuff. I actually shared a moving truck with Francis Galibas, who was hired around the same time. And
so you motor out to California.
California, yeah, and it was my first time really in California, Southern California.
And they were at Flower Street by this time, right?
Yep.
When you got there.
Yeah, that's right.
So what was your first impression of Disney's? Because you sort of catch the early wave of that second golden age after Little Mermaid, but before all of the monster hits that followed.
Yeah. Oh, it was a dream. It was a dream come true. It seemed funny that, the weirdest thing to me was that this department that was kind of like the seed of the whole company, and the source, the creative source of so much of what the company is all about, was relegated to these warehouses out in the middle of, definitely out of the public eye.
The Grand Central Industrial Park.
Yeah, beautiful downtown Glendale, or not even downtown, but and that seemed a bit weird to me, but especially because there was an animation building in the middle of the studio.
Which was no longer used for animation.
Right. Yeah, and that building is so perfect for it. It's just, I could go into that.
It was designed for it.
Yeah, it's so wonderful.
Not anymore.
Yeah, the concept of having a windowed office is so
it's
foreign now.
It's really better than the Hat building across the street in terms of layout and all that and design. Yeah, it's much better.
Well, at least the Hat building has Braille on the office's doors for the blind artists.
Yeah, and it's hot on one floor and cold on another, and
yeah, that's interesting in itself.
all that stuff.
But yeah, so there we were on Flower Street, and the culture was so, there's this great excitement that, they just had the success of Little Mermaid, and it was such a sensation all over the country that, the world really probably.
Sort of like getting at Disney's right after Snow White.
Right. Yeah, and up to that point, my thinking had also been, sure, I'd like to work for Disney, but I'd just be a cog in the machine. And really, from the moment I started, I was treated with a lot more respect than I ever expected.
Really?
Yeah, very
that's
much.
good.
Yeah, it's been so great, and to this day, there are ups and downs, but overall, I consider what I came in as, and there was a point earlier today that I said something like, that I was an amazing artist for a scientist, but I had my perspective really clarified when I started at Sheridan, because there were true artists there, and I could understand I wasn't really an artist at that point. I was not bad with drawing, and I could make a likeness, but it took quite a bit of study after that to and to this day there are people that would not consider me an artist, so it's all perspective.
I think there are relatively few. So you started at Disney's, and your first project, you were telling me, was Prince and the Pauper, and what were some of the things that you did on that?
On Prince and the Pauper, it was mostly rough in-betweening. I started off being assigned to Mark Hausler. He was my mentor. And so I was kind of like an apprentice to him, and I would rough in between his scenes as he animated them. He wasn't getting quite enough work at that point. It was approaching the end of the production, and he wasn't getting enough work to keep me fed all the time. And so I was doing a lot of personal tests and things like that. Then Andreas
Deja.
Yeah, Andreas Deja was looking for somebody to help, like rough in between on longer scenes that he was doing, and he needed a boost with his speed, and in that way he could focus on animation.
And he was also on Prince and the Pauper.
He was also on Prince and the Pauper. He was pretty much heading up the whole Mickey thing. And so he stole me from Mark Hausler. He borrowed me, but ended up never returning me. And so I was basically apprenticed to Andreas through that and Beauty and the Beast.
So what did you take away from those two animators? What were there elements of high advice, learning that you took away, and
Definitely.
What were they?
Yeah, definitely. I remember Mark Hausler pointing out key things about direction and in like in sharp movement and sort of like comic animation, and there were some very good clear pointers he gave me on that. And Andreas, of course, is a fantastic artist, beautiful drawings, and his approach to animation is something that was fascinating to see, because it was different from the way I would think about it, but it kind of broadened my perspective.
What was it? Do you remember?
Yeah, oh yeah. He would do these very beautiful loose drawings of the poses that he would work out. He would do these thumbnails first, and these beautiful loose drawings, and then if the tests would work out, then he would go in and he would tie them down, and even the tied down drawings that he would do over the loose, like light blue, he would come tie them down in graphite, and those tied down drawings had this beautiful looseness to them too.
Yeah.
And on top of that, the motion would come in. There was just he would keep track of secondary motion through these pose to pose style animation things, which was just mind-boggling to me, because I think especially for secondary animation, I think mostly straight ahead.
Yeah. You were more of a straight ahead guy at that point, or you were an in-betweener at that point. So.
Yeah, I was an in-betweener, but having animated in New York before that, I would say that my work was kind of straight ahead. It was I would do broader spaces between the poses going straight ahead. So in a way, it might work out to sort of half pose to pose, half straight ahead.
Oh, I see. So when you wrap up on Prince and the Pauper, did you move straight on to Beauty and the Beast at that point? And what was your role on that picture? Because that's kind of the early days of. You became an animator on that show, or were you still an assistant on that show?
I was still Andreas's apprentice on that, or animating assistant.
Yeah.
And so I was basically doing the same thing through that show. And
What characters did you work on?
It was Gaston.
Oh, okay.
And he actually on Prince and the Pauper, there were one or two scenes where he had me animate as well. Like he would give me little sections to just animate on my own. And it was the same thing on Beauty and the Beast. There were one or two things where he would just have me animate rather than him do it himself.
Yeah.
And but the demands were so high for footage that he found me pretty useful as a rough in-betweener, and so things that I would submit to the review board to try and be advanced to an animator would all be personal tests.
Right.
And the review board would say, well, that's nice, but we want to see stuff that you've done under somebody's direction.
Right.
And so it ended up that finally toward the end of the picture, they worked out some other deal where I would not be animating yet, and they were considering maybe putting me in a program or something like that through the summer after the picture was finished.
Yeah, yeah. So you did a few scenes in animation on Beauty and the Beast, but mainly you were following.
Right.
You were part of Andreas's crew.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. So that picture comes out and is even a bigger monster hit
Yes.
than the previous one, Little Mermaid. Or actually, there was Rescuers Down Under in there, which was not a huge monster hit.
Yeah. Yeah, that came out at the same time as
Prince and the Pauper. So the
yeah.
time you're doing Prince and the Pauper, doing that. So when did you become a full bore? It wasn't that long after that you became a full bore.
No, it was partway into Aladdin. I was working under Will Finn, and then partway through that.
You're doing a carpet, or what?
It was the Iago the parrot.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
He's doing it.
Yeah, that was another education. That was a lot of fun too.
You're no longer doing humans; you're doing birds.
Yeah, yeah. It was.
So you got a lot more footage to animate on that show.
Yes, yeah, I did.
And then, what's your takeaway from that picture? Was there any epiphanies of, oh my God, I should be doing it this way, or oh my God, it's I've broken through another glass ceiling, or
well, just becoming an animator it felt like breaking through a glass ceiling right there. But other than that, there probably were little epiphanies that I'm not
they've
remembering
faded
right
away
now.
at this point.
It was so long ago.
Yeah, it's 20 years. But that, when you got to the end of that picture, I mean, you rose through the ranks pretty quickly and became a directing animator shortly after that, didn't you?
Yeah, actually, quicker than I probably deserved. It was, I had people pulling for me, and it was, perfect timing that the company was expanding to 2 pictures a year, and a whole bunch of the experienced people were going on to 1 picture, and it left room for
Other people move up on the other one.
Yeah, and I can't help but be grateful for that, because I was given opportunities that I'd say I didn't necessarily deserve, but at the same time they were just being really generous, and on top of that, the timing. Had I been there at a different time, I probably wouldn't have had that same opportunity.
Just like probably the guys that came in the 30s, if they come in 10 years later, wouldn't have been so good. What are the differences between style of a Will Finn to an Andy Deja to a Mark Kausler? What differences did you perceive in their approaches, or
there's
the whole way they?
There are a couple of fundamental differences. Like, for one thing, Andreas's drawings were a lot more swoopy, and whereas with Will Finn and with, I'm probably going to be heard by by some experts who say he doesn't know what he's talking about with this. But my impression was that with Mark Kausler and Will Finn, they were much more focused on the direction of lines and making sure that these things would be, these lines would be happening to direct the eye in sort of way. Whereas with Andreas, it wouldn't be so much about drawing these lines in and getting that direction to make that direction clear. He I guess would have it innate already, maybe in the drawing, but it was more about the beauty of the nice loose swoop and that sort of thing.
Beauty of the line and all that stuff.
And it ended up being the beauty of the form and that kind of thing. It was, and it both directions to approach animation worked, in their own ways.